The map is spread wide, a flat expanse of borders and oceans under the harsh glare of a single overhead light. Then, the shadow begins. It does not crawl across the paper from the edges, it blooms from within the ink itself, a stain of absolute, light-consuming blackness that defies the geography beneath it. It stretches across continents, erasing coastlines and mountain ranges with a slow, deliberate weight. The air in the room grows heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. Look closely at the edges of the encroaching dark. It is not merely a void, it is a composite entity, a shifting mass of limbs and iron, rising from the ancient warnings of Revelation 13. Every nation caught in its path loses its definition, dissolving into the silhouette of something far older and hungrier. The borders that once dictated the order of the world are now nothing more than lines beneath a shroud. Something is breathing beneath the surface of the paper, a rhythmic, metallic pulse that echoes against the stillness of the room. The beast has found its shape, and it is no longer hiding in the pages of prophecy. It is here, anchoring itself to the very bedrock of the modern age. The shadow stops its expansion, settling heavily over the center of the North American continent. The ink deepens, transforming into a dense, metallic gray that pulses with a cold, artificial light. This is the heart of the machine. The United States is no longer just a nation on a map. It is the geopolitical manifestation of Babylon. Every thread of global trade, every flow of capital, and every signal of cultural influence now pulls inward toward this singular point. It is a hunger that consumes without satisfaction. Markets across the globe tremble as they align with this gravitational pull, forced to mirror the frantic rhythm of its materialism. Nothing exists outside the reach of this central hub. Ideas are commodified, dreams are weighed in currency, and the very concept of value is rewritten to serve this new, insatiable master. Look at the data streams, the frantic movement of stocks, the constant broadcast of desire. It all originates from this singular source. The world is being reorganized, stripped of its diversity, and fed into the furnace of this global engine. The transformation is absolute. The hub is set, and the gears of the world have begun to turn in perfect, terrifying synchronization with its heartbeat. The lens descends now, pulling away from the global view to focus on the marble corridors of Washington, D.C. Here, the architecture dictates the intent. Look at the neoclassical columns, massive and unyielding, reaching toward the sky. They are not merely structures of concrete and stone. They are deliberate mirrors, reflections of the Senate of Rome, crafted to project an aura of eternal, unassailable authority. This is the first layer of the beast, spiritual Rome. Beneath the polished white surfaces, the machinery of the modern state operates with the same cold precision as the legions of the past. Every law drafted within these halls, every military directive issued from these chambers, carries the weight of an iron fist. The city is a physical manifestation of legal and military dominion, designed to intimidate and command. It is a calculated projection of power that demands submission from the world beyond its borders. The marble is a facade for a rigid, ancient structure that has been resurrected to claim the modern era. This is the foundation of the beast, where the past is repurposed to ensure that the current order remains absolute and unchallenged. The architecture is the first warning sign, a silent stone sentinel standing over the machinery of global control. The camera pushes past the marble columns, finding the interior where the true architecture of power resides. It is not made of stone, but of ink, paper, and cold enforcement. This is the iron fist of Roman law, a system so pervasive that no corner of the globe remains untouched by its reach. Observe the legislative chambers where directives are forged. These are not merely debates. They are the gears of a machine that turns human activity into state-sanctioned compliance. Every treaty, every regulation, every sanction acts as a link in a chain that binds the international order to a singular, rigid will. The authority is absolute. It does not negotiate. It dictates. Look at how these laws ripple outward, dictating the movement of resources, the policing of borders, and the containment of dissent. The modern world operates within a cage of its own creation, a structure built on the premise that power is the only valid currency of statecraft. There is no escape from this administrative grip, for it is etched into the very codes that govern global interaction. The Iron Fist is not a threat, it is the environment. It defines the limits of action, the boundaries of trade, and the inevitable consequences for those who attempt to deviate from the established path. The structure is complete, locking the world into a permanent state of subordination. The gaze descends further, beneath the marble and the law, into the dark underbelly of the machine. This is the second layer, spiritual Egypt. It does not speak in the language of statutes or Senate floors. It speaks in the cold arithmetic of the ledger. Trace the roots of this system back to the historical foundations of physical bondage. Those chains were not broken, they were refined. They were cast into the digital infrastructure of modern banking and global trade. Observe the cycle, the constant, grinding necessity for labor that sustains the elite, the extraction of value from the masses, and the redirection of that wealth into the hands of a few. This is the engine of the beast, a mechanism that turns human effort into a commodity. It forces the population into a perpetual state of service, where the goal is not prosperity, but the maintenance of the system itself. The architecture of this bondage is invisible, yet it is as tangible as a whip. It is found in the interest rates, the credit scores, and the endless accumulation of debt that keeps the population anchored to their stations. Spiritual Egypt is the master of the long game, ensuring that the labor of the many serves the hunger of the few, century after century, without pause or reprieve. The weight of the system is felt most sharply in the individual life. Debt is the primary tether. It is not a temporary setback. It is the fundamental design of the modern economic engine. Watch the cycle repeat. A generation is born into a structure that demands payment before they have even begun to produce. Every dollar earned is already claimed, redirected to settle the interest on a debt created by those who came before. This is the refined servitude of the present era. It does not require physical shackles to keep the population in place. It uses the threat of insolvency. It uses the fear of losing one's position in the social order. The machine calculates exactly how much an individual can survive on, leaving just enough to sustain them for another day of labor. There is no surplus in this equation, only a perpetual state of catching up. The system thrives on this anxiety. It builds its towers on the back of this exhaustion. Every transaction is a link in a chain that grows heavier with each passing year. The individual feels the drag of this obligation in every decision, every purchase, and every aspiration. They are not merely workers, they are perpetual debtors, locked in a mechanism designed to ensure that no one ever truly breaks free from the reach of the beast. Beyond the ledger and the debt lies the final facade, spiritual Babylon. This is the merchant of luxury, the architect of the glittering distraction. If the previous layer binds the hands, this layer captures the eyes. Observe the marketplace. It is a hall of mirrors designed to refract reality into 1,000 confusing pieces. Luxury is the primary weapon. It is sold as a status, a necessity, and a reward for the very labor that keeps the population in servitude. The storefronts shine with artificial light, casting long shadows over the reality of the machine. The beast orchestrates a constant stream of new desires, ensuring the mind is always chasing the next acquisition. This is the engine of cultural confusion. It creates a vacuum of meaning, then fills it with products, brands, and fleeting trends. The individual is encouraged to define their existence through what they possess rather than what they produce. This consumerism is not merely commerce, it is a ritual of distraction. It masks the true nature of the system, replacing the cold reality of the debtor's cage with the vibrant, noisy theater of them all. The merchant is always open, the shelves are always restocked, and the hunger for more is the fuel that keeps the entire global apparatus spinning in place. The marketplace is merely the foundation. Above it, the beast broadcasts a relentless frequency of cultural dissonance. It does not just sell goods, it sells a fractured reality. Turn on any screen and watch the signals split. One message promotes indulgence while another demands sacrifice. One voice champions progress while another incites fear of the neighbor. This is not a failure of communication. It is the intent. The orchestrator ensures that no two people are looking at the same map. By saturating the airwaves with noise, the beast creates a state of permanent disorientation. The individual wanders through a sea of manufactured desires, unable to anchor their thoughts to a singular truth. They reach for meaning but grasp only slogans, trends, and outrage. The goal is to keep the mind so occupied with the trivial that it never perceives the structural. Every debate is a diversion, every movement a mirage. The population is left adrift, floating in a current of contradictions that shift direction with every news cycle. They are lost, not because they lack intelligence, but because the environment is designed to dissolve the ability to distinguish the predator from the path. The confusion is the cage, and it is invisible to those trapped within its walls. The confusion is not accidental. It is the byproduct of a calculated design. To understand how the beast exerts its will across the centuries, one must look past the curtain of noise to the 10 horns. These are not merely figures of power. They are the instruments of an imperial trajectory, the select vessels that have steered this entity through its evolution. Each horn represents a concentrated point of authority, a pivot in the timeline where the nature of the beast was redefined. These leaders did not merely preside over an era. They codified the expansion, solidified the reach, and locked the world into the architecture of the system. The horns chart the rise of the structure from a fledgling state to a global apparatus. By tracking their decisions, the history of the beast becomes visible. It is a sequence of strategic maneuvers, each horn adding a layer of weight to the foundation. As we examine this progression, the chaotic shifts of the modern era resolve into a clear, linear path of consolidation. The beast does not act randomly. It moves with the precise intent of those who hold the reins, carving its path through the map of the world with the force of a singular, relentless ambition. To trace the lineage of the beast, one must return to the very origin of the Republic. George Washington stands as the foundational horn, the primary architect of the imperial trajectory. His tenure was not merely the birth of a nation. It was the casting of the mold for a global entity. He set the precedent for a central authority that would eventually grow to encompass the world. Look at the capital city itself, designed with the deliberate geometry of power. The neoclassical columns were pulled from the architecture of Rome, mirroring the Senate and the iron fist of legal dominion. This was the first layer, spiritual Rome. Washington laid the stones, creating a framework where the state became an instrument of expansion. His decisions established the reach of the military and the scope of executive authority. He did not simply lead a revolution. He built a mechanism of governance that prioritized structural growth above all else. Every policy, every boundary drawn, and every institutional structure formed under his hand served to solidify the nascent beast. The foundation was set, cold and absolute, ensuring that the trajectory toward global hegemony was locked into the very DNA of the system long before the modern era began. The foundation laid by the first horn required a successor to breathe fire into the structure. Theodore Roosevelt arrived to transform the dormant apparatus into an active, aggressive force. He recognized that the beast could not remain contained within the borders of a single continent. He redirected the energy of the state outward, forcing the eyes of the nation toward the horizons of the sea. Roosevelt acted with the intensity of a predator, pushing the limits of executive power to demand global relevance. He initiated the construction of a massive naval fleet, turning the steel of the nation into a projection of iron-fisted intent. This was the moment the beast shed its isolationist shell. He intervened in foreign territories, seized control of strategic transit routes, and established a presence that crossed every ocean. The map was no longer a static document. It became a target. Under his guidance, the beast gained its claws. He dictated terms, settled international disputes by the weight of military presence, and codified the doctrine of intervention. By the end of his tenure, the trajectory was irreversible. The entity had expanded its reach, consolidated its influence, and claimed its place as a dominant player on the world stage. The beast was no longer a regional experiment. It was a global empire in the making. The trajectory of the beast reached a terrifying threshold with the arrival of Harry S. Truman. He became the nuclear horn, the man who transitioned the state from the era of conventional steel into the age of atomic fire. This was not merely a shift in weaponry. It was a fundamental change in the nature of command. Truman held the power to vaporize cities and alter the climate of the Earth with a single decision. He pressed the switch that unleashed the atom, and in that flash of light, the stakes of global power transformed forever. The beast had moved beyond the reach of armies and navies. It now possessed the capacity to extinguish the world it sought to dominate. Every nation on the map suddenly existed in the shadow of this new, absolute authority. Truman weaponized the very fabric of reality, binding the survival of the globe to the whims of the imperial center. The air grew heavy with the weight of this new capability. He did not ask for permission from the world. He dictated the terms of existence through the sheer, undeniable reality of the blast. The beast had achieved its most lethal form, and the silence that followed the detonation was the sound of a world realizing it was now permanently held under the threat of total, immediate destruction. The atomic fire left a void, and into that vacuum, the 1947 National Security Act descended like a steel cage. It was the precise moment the beast ceased to be a temporary government and became a permanent, self-sustaining apparatus. Truman signed the papers, and the Department of War and the Navy dissolved, merging their vast resources into a singular, unified defense machine. This was not a change in policy. It was the birth of an unelected state. Offices were partitioned behind layers of classification that even the public could not penetrate. Files vanished into deep storage vaults, and dossiers on foreign entities grew until they filled entire wings of government buildings. A new class of advisors emerged, men who did not stand for election and did not answer to the ballot box. They inhabited the corridors of the Pentagon, moving through restricted zones where the light of public oversight never reached. Decisions were no longer debated in the open. They were processed through cold, systematic channels of intelligence and surveillance. The beast had built itself a brain that functioned independently of the body it controlled. By the time the ink dried, the machinery was complete. It hummed in the background, a silent, invisible engine that would continue to run, regardless of who sat in the seat of power. The era of the permanent state had begun. The illusion of stability held for decades, anchored to the weight of gold bars locked in vaults. Then came 1971. Richard Nixon walked into the Oval Office, his movements sharp and deliberate. He reached for the pen, hovering over the document that would dismantle the Bretton Woods Agreement. With one decisive stroke, he severed the dollar from its golden tether. The connection, once physical and absolute, dissolved into air. Around the globe, the markets hesitated, then froze. The bedrock of trust had been pulled away, leaving the entire financial structure suspended over an abyss. Nixon did not pause to explain. He simply acted. The gold was no longer the master. The paper was. This was the moment the beast transitioned from a treasury of tangible wealth to a printer of infinite debt. Every bank in every capital city felt the shift as the currency they relied upon became a phantom, backed only by the reach of imperial force. The transition was complete by dusk. The world woke up to a new reality where value was no longer found in earth or metal, but in the mandate of the beast. Money ceased to be a store of labor and became a tool of total, inescapable control. With the gold standard buried, the beast required a new anchor to keep its currency from drifting into worthlessness. It found its leverage in the lifeblood of the industrial age: oil. The architects of this new order moved quickly, securing agreements with energy-producing giants. The demand was absolute. If a nation wanted to power its factories, heat its homes, or fuel its transport, it had to pay in the currency of the beast. This was not a negotiation. It was a cage. Every barrel of crude oil extracted from the earth became a tether, binding foreign treasuries to the Federal Reserve. Nations that had once been independent found themselves forced to stockpile the beast's paper just to keep their lights on. Central banks across the world transformed into collection agencies for the imperial treasury. The trap was elegant and inescapable. As demand for energy rose, the global dependency on the dollar deepened, turning the entire planet into a closed loop of debt and consumption. There was no alternative, no escape route, and no way to trade outside the system without facing immediate isolation. The petrodollar became the iron chain, locking the world's pulse to the rhythm of a single, central engine. The machine was now fully fed. The machine ran smoothly, grinding down sovereignty with predictable, rhythmic precision.